And welcome in as we recap week number 6 here, Friday Night Drive here on Shaw Local. We are glad you're with us for this week's edition. I'm Matt Rodewald. He's Steve Soucie. We're all rested and relaxed after a wild weekend, and I think there's a bunch of teams that just scored once again Friday night because we saw a lot of offense. We're taping this on the final day of 80-degree weather, so we're going to talk a little bit about that weather theory that we have because I think it's the last time we can deal with that, and we might have introduce a new control to that theory of our defenses tired across the state. We'll talk about the Catholic League today, of course, to start things off. Some good defense that we've seen around the state. Yes, there are good defenses happening out there. Some news and notes and nuggets. We do have a losing streak that was snapped, and we'll throw some flowers at some 6-0 teams. Seuss, I'm officially on the Oak Lawn bandwagon. I asked for a seat, and they literally gave it to me on Twitter. So I was very excited to be like, I get a seat on the Spartans bandwagon, and it's looking good heading into the crosstown battle with Richards this week. Very pumped up for that.
There we go. Absolutely. It has been a very interesting start for them. Kind of comes out of nowhere. I really didn't see this coming, but it has been a pretty crazy year in that South Suburban Conference on both sides. Both divisions, you kind of look at everything, and there might be a result that throws you off a little bit, but now by this point, I'm kind of like, well, just about anything can happen in that league every week. So, just kind of a lot of, I don't know if it's parity. I don't know if there's what's going on there, but it seems like every week there's 3 or 4 games in that league that are, decided by less than a touchdown. Almost every single week, and Oak Lawn, to their credit, has managed to come out on top in a lot of those close battles this year. So great for them. Should be interesting this week with that game that I don't think anybody before the season would have forecasted that Oak Lawn Community would have a better record than Richards heading into this 7 games.
Awesome. Great for the town, great for the community, great for and you're telling me those kids don't know each other? Of course they do. In the advent of social media now, they know exactly who they are. They probably came up together in a lot of sports, whether it was football or something else. And, by being on the bandwagon, I had exclusive access to seeing some homecoming attire from those football players. They looked outstanding on Saturday night, dapper, as I'll say, as they went to homecoming. Then they turned the page this week to the crosstown rivalry. So that's enough Oak Lawn chatter. That's one of the 6-0 teams that we're just kind of curious about. But let's go back to the Catholic League first and dive in here and try and break this down a little bit because we had a big game with Mount Carmel and Brother Rice, both teams showing their cards and how good they can be at times. Mount Carmel is able to put more together than Brother Rice, but really a measuring stick for both of these teams in the Catholic League. Mount Carmel won the game, but I thought Brother Rice had a pretty good showing in one of the most electric atmospheres that they've seen down there in Dante.
Yeah, I came out of that game feeling pretty much exactly the same way I did going into it, which was you've got the favorite in 8A, you've got the favorite in the 7A on the field right there between those two teams. It was funny when I was going through, restacking my power rankings, I almost kept Brother Rice exactly where they were before.
Really?
Even after a loss, because in my mind I was sitting there going, well, you know what? I don't know if any of these teams behind them can beat them. So I ended up moving them down one spot, but I definitely considered just keeping them right where they were at.
And Brother Rice, of course, their loss and their good showing is one thing, but when you talk about points, the one we were watching on Friday night, that was going back and forth and back and forth. And then the stream ended because the 3-hour cap, and they're like, no, we're going to keep playing. We've got 6 minutes left. And we're watching it on the interwebs. And it was Montini and Carmel going back and forth. 1,000 passing yards between the two. Trey Taylor seemed to, and I kept up with him on social media just over the weekend. It just stumbled through my feed because it was more like, he was amused at how that went. Yeah, he didn't like the win, but I think he was like, yeah, that was fun, man. I had a good time with that. How good are those two quarterbacks at Montini and Carmel right now?
Yeah, Izzy Abrams and Trey Taylor just put on an absolute show. And I was looking at some of the stats after the fact, and I was trying to remember the last time I saw 1,000 combined passing yards for two quarterbacks, and I couldn't come up with the answer. I mean, in attendance, hearing about it, I could not remember the last time it happened. I mean, you can look at a lot of programs in this state, and they won't have 1,000 yards passing all season. and these two combined to do it in one game.
That'll be in the state title game too in the lower classes.
it was pretty ridiculous, just the numbers and the cadence of that game. It literally felt like in those last couple of minutes, somebody was scoring about as quickly as they got the ball. It was like, boom, another big play. Kind of ridiculous. And you were talking about homecoming photos before. I don't know if you saw somebody in Trey Taylor's crew this weekend. Top notch. I just got to say, you owe it to yourself to look that up. I saw that earlier this evening. It downright floored me.
Homecoming's different nowadays than say for you and I. And we're in the back end of homecoming season. I know Yorkville had their homecoming this past weekend. I did not chaperone there in my time as a teacher and coach at Yorkville, although I was asked and I declined. But it was one of those things where the outfits are just the attire's changed. It's formal, but it's not formal.
Yeah.
It's got a little flair of a generation that you and I don't understand, so to speak. I mean, of course we understand.
You owe
we get it.
To seek that out. I will admit to that. So yeah,
it's fun more than anything else. Let's switch over to IC Catholic. I want to talk about them because that's another big win they got over St. Francis. I contend that St. Francis is going to be a very good football team. It's going to be a problem for a lot of people in 5A, but there's IC Catholic doing some damage and getting another win. And what I would argue is they're keeping their head above water in the Catholic League, but that doesn't mean anything until when they get to 3A. Because when they get to the state playoffs, they're going to be a different animal, of course. But I'm very impressed at how they're holding their own in the league.
Yeah, when you look at it, especially like who they're with in their own division. I mean, you're sitting there. They beat St. Francis the other night. They brought Nazareth down to the wire before losing that game. They still have one interdivisional game left with St. Rita, and St. Rita is likely going to be in desperation mode to get in the playoffs. That's a 2-4 football team last week. So in week 9, that makes for another fascinating game for IC Catholic. And shockingly, I don't think IC Catholic is going to need that to get into the playoffs because I think the next 2 weeks are games that they should win. So they could be potentially sitting in a situation where they could get to the 7-win level, which in that schedule, heading into the 3A playoffs, I did not forecast that at all. I knew they had some young talent. It's growing up a lot quicker than I thought it would. So I thought maybe they'd find a way to get themselves into the playoffs right now. Right now, I think it's possible for them. Heck, they could run the table here, finish 7-2, and get themselves a pretty favorable seed because they're going to have a treasure trove of playoff points because of the schedule that they play. So that's really fascinating to see the quick development of that program. And speaking to that young talent, they're not going anywhere for a while, so you better get used to this.
Let me see if I can pry some details without giving away the whole store in terms of brackets when you look ahead with IC Catholic. Because, let's simulate together. 7-2. They're in the north. There's this little team called Byron that continues to be really good. How far away from them at 7-2, knowing that there's plenty of 9-0 and 8-1s in the mix in the north, so to speak, that at 6-3, that matchup happens maybe a little bit sooner. 7-2 gives it another week, I would guess, correct?
You'd think that, but then you have to kind of look at, okay, how is the top seed situation going to shake out there? You've got a Richmond Burton team now that's in 3A and North.
That's true.
And they have a little bit better point situation than Byron does. And you know why they have that point situation?
Why, Zeus?
They played Coal City in the non-conference schedule. So that's what you get by scheduling up. Now, Byron can't help that. They're in a locked conference. They tried to help it as best they could by taking that bye week that they got and scheduling Dupec. That matters in the long-term thing, but it comes right down to it. Richmond Burton's probably going to beat Byron to the 1 line. It's going to be close, but I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. So with Burton on the 1 line, Byron on the 2, they go on the bottom. So then if IC Catholic does get to 7-2, I see them as possibly being somewhere in the 7-10 range. Where does it end up? The 8-9 would be on the top half. The 7-10 would be on the bottom half. All right. So, and then we're talking about a second round matchup, either one of those two teams. So, it just kind of depends on where it falls. 7-10, 7, 8, 9, 10. Which one is it? So that would be what I'm looking at. And then who's the 1 to 2? I think right now it's probably going to be Richmond Burton. 2 is going to be Byron. 3, Chicago Hope, if they can run the table as well. So then it becomes this little leveling thing of what it is. So, it's all kind of, speculative right now, but if you just kind of sneak a peek ahead and you think to yourself, if IC Catholic does end up beating St. Rita in week 9, they end up with a 7. If they don't, they're 6. They're probably a 12 or a 13. And if I'm a 4 or 5 seed in that 3A North, I'm beside myself with that. Yeah. Yes.
And so that, when Hope Academy also has this team called Bishop Max still in the schedule. So that's not exactly a foregone conclusion. But you just noted that Richmond Burton had some great non-conference scheduling. Byron did a good job with their non-conference schedule that they had one game. And if you want more scheduling tips, my suggestion is that you attend Seuss's open house scheduling that will happen in the spring. Coffee, donuts, light appetizers, potentially, and an open forum for you to meet people that you can schedule games with and stay in the state of Illinois. We're all friends here, aren't we? We'll talk about a scheduling quirk that popped up this week later on in the show. I want to continue on to the Catholic League, though, because one more thing with St. Pat's, because they're in control, and Yorkville, as I said on social media, polite golf clap. Good job. Keep going, because Yorkville's 6-0, got that win, and they're just watching their playoff points gradually going up.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you just kind of under the radar. I remember being all the way back at week 1. I'm like, I don't know what this means. Like when I saw that score, I'm like, is St. Patrick on the way back? Is Yorkville? You just didn't know. And as it goes along, we're learning those were 2 really good football teams. They just kicked off
really
the
good
season.
defenses too. Yeah.
So you're just kind of looking at that and saying, okay, it was a 14-7 game that first week of the season. You don't really know what to take from that. But what we're taking away from it now, with a little bit more data behind us, is 2 excellent defenses. Yorkville scratched out that win, and both sides are ultimately benefiting from having scheduled that game.
Let's switch to the other half of the Catholic League, because you mentioned Rita. We've got to talk about Joliet Catholic and Marist. Those 3 teams in particular. Josh talking about JCA's grinder of a win over Niles Notre Dame. They had to have, not pretty, but they're 2-4. If you had to pick one of these teams that doesn't make the postseason, which one is it at this moment?
I think it's Joliet Catholic. And that's largely due to the who they have this week.
That's it.
They play Mount Carmel this week. Obviously, they're a huge underdog in that game. Come down to Memorial Stadium and see if they can get that monstrous upset done. If they can, that would obviously change the fortunes greatly. But reality is that this is going to be a really hard game for them to pick up that win and stay off the 5-loss parameter. And I'm going to be honest with you, like a couple weeks ago, I would have thought that their chances to finish out the season and go to 4-5 were maybe not perfect, but they were pretty good.
Workable.
Every week, I'm starting to buy a little bit more into this Providence team. And Providence has them in week 9. I'm starting to think that is going to be an obstacle game for Joliet Catholic too. And if they don't win against Mount Carmel, they will have to win against Providence just to get to 4-5, just to get themselves in that conversation. Their playoff point situation should be fine if they can get to 4-5. I'm not so sure they can get to 4-5 though.
Last thing on this before we take a break, just because the playoff point thing is fascinating. You and I have had this for a couple of years now, where we talked about the 4-5 teams. A couple of years ago, 6 got in. Last year, 1 got in, and we saw it as the weeks went on that there were several 4-5 teams, and then we saw it slide where it's like, well, I don't know if that many are going to get in, and only 1 did, because we watched in week 9 things change. Are you seeing a similar pattern right now with that, or we don't? Is it too early to tell?
It's spiking up again because it seems like we're having more and more games that, like, I feel like on a week-to-week basis, where I feel like that team that is making that run to try to get to 5-4 has a game that they need to get, and then they don't get it. And there seems to be a lot more of those happening. There were a couple this week that went the other way, teams that I didn't think were going to get to 5-4 and got a win that they needed to kind of get themselves back into the conversation. Blue Island Eisenhower would be one of those teams that got a win this week that I didn't think they were going to. That put them back in the conversation. But for every one of those, I seem to be getting 2 teams that had a game this week. Illini West would be an example of that. Had a game this week that I thought that they were going to win, that was going to help them get to 5-4. They didn't get it. They lost by 4 points to West Hancock. So that that kind of took them out of the equation. and move them off. So for every one of those that happens to, where there's not a counterbalance team, then that means that another 4 and 5 is going to get its wings, if you will. So I mean that's how that works. So as we get deeper into the season, it's easier to target those games, see where they are, and know how important they are, because you've only got 3 games to go. You need to go 2 out of 3 here, and one of those 3 is against an undefeated team. You got to get that other one. If you don't get it, then that puts a red flag on that team. And then what I'm seeing is too many red flags at the beginning of the week. So far, what ended up happening last week, to try to make a really long discussion into a short one, what happened last year was we got to that final week, and we had a whole bunch of teams that didn't look like they had an opportunity to win in week 9 rise up to the occasion.
Yep.
And they were, some of them were beating teams with 6 and 7 wins on the season entering that game. And on paper, that doesn't look like that should happen. Well, we had a ton of them last year, and that was why that number
gets around. Yep.
The previous year, we had a whole bunch of teams going the other way, not getting to that 4-win level, needing that 5th win, and then not getting it. So usually there's a balance. Some of them on one side, some of them on the other. The last 2 years have been the polar opposite of one. We had a bunch of coming up short 2 years ago, and we had a bunch of punchers fighting their way into the field last year. So which one are we going to get? Are we going to get a balance of them, or are we going to get one column or the other? That's always what's fascinating about week 9. Well, we saw it developing on the show last year. I'm like, well, they're going down. And before the end of the night, I was like, I'm not sure we're going to get any. So
we were doing that. I remember that. And this is all the more reason why you should watch our show in week 9, because we don't know how it's going to go. And everybody's dancing around going, are we in? Are we not? Are we sure? Do we have enough? And that sort of thing. And also, it's the deleted scene from It's a Wonderful Life that Clarence says every time a bell rings, another team gets a playoff point. Is that how that goes? Or is it just the Catholic League that's involved because of the religious connotation? I don't know. Yeah. We'll have to go look on IMDb to see if we can figure that out. Time to take a timeout. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the good defensive efforts that we've seen throughout the season so far. Yes, we've had a lot of points, but we also have some good defense, and we should celebrate that. Defensive coordinators would like to hear that. Also, an update on what's going on in Rochelle, pretty serious situation that occurred at the end of the Morris game. We'll get you some of the latest that we know on that as well, and some news and notes and nuggets and what we have in terms of a losing streak. That's no more. We'll celebrate that. All of that ahead here as we recap Week 6 here, Friday Night Drive on Shaw Local.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike. With dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country, we meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
And welcome back on the program here as we continue to recap Week 6 here on Friday Night Drive here on Shaw Local. Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with you. Surprising result that messed up your entire bracket projection. The first one that comes to mind over the course of the last couple of days. Go.
There weren't a lot of them that just messed up everything, but I mentioned some of them that, like, there are a couple of conferences that have been really, really difficult to figure out. And I mentioned them a little bit in the column today. One of them is the Black Diamond. That's been a really interesting a team that kind of popped up out of nowhere this week is Christopher. They've had a few pretty bad years recently. So
yes, they have.
My grades have not been that high on them. Well, they picked up a win this week, and then I looked at them a little bit more carefully, and I said, you know what? I think there's a path that's going to get them to 5. And then I started going, well, how is that possible? And then I looked in there. I'm like, this is one of those weird anomalies that happens with lock conferences sometimes, because usually lock conferences do this for you. A 9-win team, an 8-win team, a 7-win team, a 6-win team, and a 5-win team. And those are the 5 teams that go to the playoffs.
That's right.
Every once in a while, you get a weird quirk. And this is what's happening with the Black Diamond this year. Doesn't look like we're going to have a 6-win team in the Black Diamond. So one of those teams that finishes with 4, usually from that scenario, is going to get to 5. So we're going to have an extra team from the Black Diamond. We're just going to have more with lesser records. There are going to be 3. Looks like there could be 3 5-win teams getting in, no 6-win team, and 6 teams from the Black Diamond getting into the postseason. That doesn't happen very often, and it's a weird quirk. Speaks to the depth of that conference, but it also speaks to that middle pack that's been impossible to figure out on a week-to-week basis. Who's going to win this game? Who's going to win this game? Because if you look at comparative results, this team has beat this team and this team, but lost to that team, and then you look at the other one, and then it's the exact opposite. So you can't get a clear pecking order in that league. So that's definitely one of them that has been problematic this year. But it's
transitive property does not apply to that.
It certainly does not, but it's definitely a thing that when it comes right down to it, that's when we start talking about those final bids, whether or not a 4-win team gets in, or how many 4-win teams get in. If you're used to doing this, or as long as I have, you're used to saying, okay, there are going to be 5 bids that come out of the Black Diamond. There are going to be 5 bids that come out of the Fox Valley.
Right.
You're kind of used to that, so you start doing a rough count in your head. Well, if that becomes 6, or one of those other conferences, all of a sudden for some reason it becomes 4, then you're like, well, there's another bid, or there's a bid away. So that's, it's kind of the same phenomenon that you get during March Madness when you have those conference tournaments.
Yep.
Someone claims that automatic bid, and then an at-large bid is needed for a team that you didn't think was going to need the at-large bid. So there are bid stealers out there, and that does happen sometimes, and it looks like it's developing in that conference.
I want to make an awkward transition because we had a serious situation that happened down in Morris this past weekend at the end of the game with Rochelle. It was Morris getting the win 37-14, but as everyone's leaving, none of that mattered. Dylan Manning, who's a junior running back for the Rochelle Hubs, he collapsed after the game on the sideline, ended up having to get airlifted to Loyola, surgery on Saturday to remove a clot and stop some of the bleeding in his brain. Obviously, the folks in Rochelle were shaken up by this pretty good. They had a vigil on Saturday night. That, if you know that community, that is a very, very tight-knit community with their football team. So obviously, everybody's been top of mind. We've had some updates with our reporting the last few days, but for those that may have not followed it as of, say, Monday night, where are we with Dylan Manning and his situation?
Other than just kind of learning that, the progress is, somewhat there. There's a lot of gray area on that.
Sure.
You have to think about, what you say and what you're talking about in regards to his situation right now, because it's a very precarious one. Basically overall, everyone's thoughts and prayers are with that community, that family. To see that that everything goes as well as it can in this situation. It's just something that is unfortunately, sometimes these things happen in these scenarios, and all you can hope for is that it comes out the best possible way that it can.
And to paraphrase, I put on social media that it's a reminder of how great and dangerous or terrifying that this game can really be. As much as we enjoy what the kids are doing out there and the atmosphere on Friday nights, these things can happen. I actually saw something like this a week ago, very similar, where an ambulance had to come out, stop a JV game out at Geneva, and I saw the hit, and I knew instantly how serious that was. And I don't have an update on that situation, and I don't want to speculate either. And I think you and I are both being careful without speculating on what's going on with the Manning family. But if you recall, I talked about it on the show a year ago. I went out to Rochelle on week 9 because they played on Thursday, and it was like I might as well go to a game because we're junkies in terms of football. And I was like, well, I'll just drive out there and see. And I went and saw, and he caught my attention just because of the fact that, he had some speed. He's a good player, and they describe him as a star, but he was just a sophomore a year ago, really coming into his own. And it doesn't matter the type of quality player he is or anything. He's just a human being more than anything else, and he loves playing football. But it's a reminder that it does not matter who the player is. These can happen to anyone. Very good, not fundamentally sound, not talented. It doesn't matter. So, but it caught my eye because the name I recognized, and sometimes it's a good thing in a sense that we see the name and recognize the name because we can tangibly understand what this feeling is like when you're watching these things watching these stories from afar. You're like, I think for me, I've certainly seen the pictures and I've followed it, and with all the discourse we've seen on social media outside of football these last few days or the last week or so, it's been something that's been kind of humbling to see, and a reminder that we should always remember that there are people involved. We don't get on here and criticize kids. We don't do that. We don't get on here and really criticize coaches. These are more often than not teachers doing what they love to do, and they put a lot of time into it. And sometimes these teachers are football coaches who happen to be teachers at the same time. But the kids, this is all they play. This is what they live for, and they don't think of this. They don't think of these sorts of situations that can happen. So, I know his father's talked a lot about it. I've been impressed in terms of just how much he's given information. I certainly hope everything's going to continue to improve. We've seen that the last few days, but it is certainly scary to see that. Have you seen an injury situation recently in person where you're like, man, it's a reminder of like what we see and face potentially every day?
Yeah, it's one of those things that, it's just kind of always looms like around the situation. You're kind of aware of it, and it's like I've been fortunate that I have not really seen a lot of really, really severe ones in quite some time. And that's one of those things but you're always kind of aware of it, and the antenna go up when you're just kind of attending a game and you see the ambulance guys moving around and doing things. You're like, well, that's probably not so good. Unfortunately, this season I was at a game at Glenbard West, and I was worried because I immediately saw them bring out a backboard in one situation. Turned out they didn't need it; they were just using it. They were bringing it out in case they needed it. But
abundance of caution, yeah,
always gives you pause when you see something like that. So fortunately, it wasn't that serious in that particular instance, but it's always something that's back of mind, to be honest with you, in this game, because like you said, as much as we're all passionate about the game, it's just something you have to be mindful of. It is something that can happen, and most of the programs are fortunate enough to have the medical resources on site that help take care of those things when they do actually unfortunately occur.
Sure, and also with resources from the government that changed over the years, we don't see ambulances in places that you'd expect. Even suburban games where they have to call them still, and they do, and it's quick, but it's not the same as being on site right there. So we know that let's just say that the science is much better than we've ever understood it to be. So we're thankful for the fact that there's care, there's attention, and as we've already said the words abundance of caution, they are very, very careful with that. So our thoughts and prayers are with the folks in Rochelle. I'll certainly be wearing purple in my mind this weekend and rooting for Rochelle. I know those kids probably trying to practice. I don't even know how you get ready for a game like that when you know that your teammate is facing that. So hats off to him. And I know there was another situation, I believe at Rockford Lutheran this weekend. It was very similar as well. So our best thoughts are with them. I want to transition back into football here and actual gameplay, because one thing we noticed over the course of the weekend was a lot of points, tons and tons of points. I think you wrote 134 teams with 40-plus points in their wins. The weather is starting to cool down a little bit. let's give some credit to those defensive teams. What are the teams that are really good? You wrote them this morning, 34 points or less. There's a couple of them. I know Hayworth and the Hornets, they have the defensive buzz.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of them. That list is not very long, and when I say 34 points, that's basically a touchdown or less at this point in time. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about there. Yeah. There's a couple of interesting stories in there. There are two teams from the same conference that unfortunately don't play each other during the regular season, because I'd like to see that matchup. Camp Point Central and Calhoun are both under that threshold, and there are only 7 teams on that list. So I found it pretty remarkable that they're in the same conference around there. Camp Point Central's only given up 20 points all season. And then the other one that kind of stands out to me on that group is Dixon, who gave up 28 points in one game to Byron, the Byron loss. And then 4 consecutive shutouts since that game where they gave up 28 points. So they're still under that threshold of 34. They gave up 28 of them to Byron in week 2 and have proceeded to throw together 4 straight shutouts after that.
Look at that stat that you see on the screen. They've never had 5 shutouts in a row. They've had 4, and the only time they did that was 1950. That's a multi-generational defense they have marching out there. I mean, Dixon, after that loss to Byron, they kind of flew under the radar just because when you play them so early and the result is like, okay, you go away for a while. That's just how the spotlight works sometimes. And those kids have been kept on motoring, and the Dukes are going to be dangerous in the postseason.
Yeah, it was funny. I was kind of looking at my state ranking poll a couple of weeks ago, and I was like going, maybe I just I downgraded Dixon too much after that loss to Byron. Because I was trying to figure out teams to fill out the bottom of my poll, and I'm like going, why don't I have Dixon in here? This doesn't make sense. So then I was just like, I slotted them in. I can't remember exactly where I slotted them in, but I was thinking to myself, yeah, I think maybe I've downgraded them a little bit too much after that loss because, what we talked about a whole bunch of times on this podcast is that was a game last year that we got some build-up for.
Yeah, we did. For weeks.
Season, we got deeper down in the season, so it was like they're still undefeated, so they were still kind of climbing the polls, and they were there. But now it was like, okay, right out of the box, they're already like, well, they're just at 500. They're a little above 500. So they're not jumping off the page at you like they were before. So, but I've corrected that error, and I too expect them to be a pretty substantial factor in the 4A bracket. But it's also a very interesting 4A North bracket that they're going to be in, because it looks like Montini's staying in 4. Morris is probably going to be in 4. This is not your. This is not your dad's 4A. I'll put it that way. Okay, this is a different looking 4A right now. There are some schools in 4A that are sliding towards 4A right now that are not typically in 4A. That whole bracket almost looks like a 5A bracket right now, to be completely honest with you. With teams like Morris, like I mentioned, with Montini possibly in there. Metamora is another team that I'm not used to seeing in 4A.
This weekend, yeah.
I mean, it's just
Montini, Morris, Metamora, Dixon. November is going to be cold and awful. Yeah. So because it's been awesome, for the first 6 weeks, which means we're going to pay for it with a horrible postseason slate of games in terms of weather goes. So that's going to be some of the nastiest hitting that we've ever seen in Class 4A. So just saddle up for some 10-7 games because that's what's coming. The opposite end of that, Peoria and Bolingbrook. Well, can they get 80 again this weekend? Is that how that's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where I was struggling to find actually one of those scores on Friday night because I'd actually seen they went over 80 and I couldn't get it verified anywhere. But I did watch just a tiny little sliver of that game while we were going through games, and all I kept seeing was Bolingbrook making these huge plays. So I was like, well, I think that's possible. I'll tell you, that's a team that at the beginning of the season I did not know what to expect from them. Mm-hmm. But they seem to have really gelled, especially, obviously, the 84 points notwithstanding. Prior to that, they started to seem to find some things on offense too. They're running a little bit of triple option in Bolingbrook. That seems to be giving some opponents some problems. TJ Lewis is a pretty talented running back for them. But they've been airing the ball out a little bit more than maybe they have the last couple of seasons. Getting back, maybe not quite back to the days when they still had Jonas Williams in the Bolingbrook program, but throwing it more than they have the last 2 years. So basically in a situation where, they have now kind of utilized some of the tools that they have at their disposal a little bit better.
Glad you segued nicely to Jonas Williams, because the watch in terms of touchdowns is over 131 touchdown passes. He is the state record holder. And we saw the touchdown pass that put him over the top against Mattia Valley. The whole team ran out of the field. I don't know if there was a penalty called, but who cares, right, at that point? And quite the record night down at Lincoln Way East with Zvonar getting 250 wins. You had some fireworks going on at halftime. What a night down there at Lincoln Way East.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's like the stars have kind of aligned for this program this year. A lot of historic situations for them. Coach Zvonar getting to 250 wins. It's the 25th anniversary of that program this year since they opened up the school. So do the quick math in your head. That's a program that's averaging 10 wins a season. Think about that for a second. That is a lot. That's crazy. All right, that is a crazy number to think about. And then having Jonas Williams make this charge to the records, this was fully expected. I mean, I thought midway through the season we'd have the touchdown passing record. Probably by the end of the regular season, we will have the yardage record as well. He's about 700 yards short of that. So if they have some competitive games and actually let him play into the third quarter, he might get that pretty soon. But otherwise, I think we'll probably get there around the end of the regular season. So. Impressive career, and like I was talking about last week, I think it's going to be interesting to see how far he puts that record away now. Because I mean, he threw 4 touchdown passes. The first one broke the record, so he's already sitting at the situation where he's got 135 touchdown passes. How far is he going to bury this record? Is he going to get 20 past it? 25? I mean, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
And he's been pulled a lot because they've been so far ahead. But we've got games with Sandburg and Lincoln Way West still on schedule here, meaning they're going to need him into the second half at the very least. And that's a very low bar at this point. And to be fair with Lincoln Way West and Sandburg, good teams throughout the course of the year. But then you get in the postseason, then you're going to see all cylinders firing for sure. So you're probably right. 699 is what he needs to get over the hump there. Let's go through some news and notes real quick, and let's start with their 6-0 teams. We mentioned Morris real quick. How about the kudos to them? 6-0. They got that win over Rochelle, marred by the injury a little bit. But when you go through what got them to 6-0, and their schedule's fascinating with Peoria. You got Byron Center coming still. The grind that is the Interstate 8. They started off in Wilmington, and it seems like their defense really appreciated having to figure out how to stop Wilmington for several months because it's kind of been the catalyst for them.
Yeah, it has, and it's one of those things when you just kind of look at what you said right there. Morris kind of got that little test where, to be honest with you, they were pretty close to losing that football game. But ever since they've kind of kept, especially granted, it was a 35-28 game, but people don't really hold Peoria to 28 points. Mm-hmm. That's a good defensive effort against a team like Peoria. We were talking about it 5 minutes ago because they scored 80 points in a game. I mean, that's a program that scores a lot of points, but ever since they've just been their first string defense, because they've been winning games comfortably, hasn't really allowed that much, that many points to be scored upon them. And now with it definitely looking like they are a 4A team in the postseason rather than a 5A team, I think the combination of their offense with being able to throw the ball but leaning on a power running game that's got 2 different weapons in that backfield, coupled with this defense at the 4A level, I think they're going to be a really, really difficult team to knock out of those playoffs. I know there are some behemoths that are potentially sitting in that bracket. We talked about it before, but I'll tell you right now, I'd be really interested to see what happened in a Morris-Montini game.
Me too.
I honestly think that's a heck of a football game if it materializes as so.
We have talked a lot about the Fighting I-57s down at Clifton Central, but let's give some love to Westville because that was a big win for them. I know nothing about that program or that community. That's down by you a little bit, Seuss. Can you shed some light? I'm just curious as to what the atmosphere and what the feeling is with Westville football being 6-0.
Well, not only has this been a pretty impressive season for them, Westville is typically a playoff type of team in the Vermilion Valley, but they're typically maybe a 3rd or a 4th place team in that league. They get in, they're probably not But something changed, like in the offseason. I started to hear about how good this team was.
Right.
And when you looked at it, and I'm not sure if it's still the case, there was actually an error in tabulating their points. Through 5 weeks, they had scored more points than any team in the state this year. And they were winning that battle comfortably. So, I mean, they have put up a ton of points. And it was interesting because that Central game was close early, but then Westville kind of dropped the hammer in the second half and just said, nope, we're going to do what we do, and ended up putting up a solid total against a very good team. But, I mean, this is an interesting team just in regards to what they will be able to do. And they're also an interesting team from a geography perspective because as a 2A team, they're a small 2A team, but they're definitely going to be a 2A playoff team. They kind of fall right on that line where the north and south bracket lies. And if I'm in 2A, honestly, I want to be in that south bracket. I mean, because there's a lot of pretty dynamic teams that are in the north side of that bracket.
Right.
And that's one of those things we talked about it before, where there are going to be some of these small classifications that are loaded up on 9-0 teams. It looks like on paper,
about it, yep.
Especially if Westville goes north, I think there could be as many as 6 9-0 teams in that north bracket. So, that's crazy. That's a lot. Even if it ends up being 4, that's still a bunch. So, and then you've got a whole tier of 8-1 teams that will potentially fall into that bracket as well. And that's one of those brackets. We talked about 6-3 teams maybe getting a home game. That's a bracket where an 8-1 team could easily end up on the road.
It's amazing to me just to think about the fact that you've worked all year to work your way to at least a home game in round 1, and you're 8-1, and no, you got to go on the road. Let's go through more things that you can read in your Shaw local news outlets for sure. One thing that caught my eye was, Genoa Kingston. There's orange, and then there's Genoa Kingston orange, which is a completely different color. Their kicker, Adrian Leon, 9 extra points against Lutheran. Now, again, this is, not exactly the easiest thing to do. The week before, 7 of 8. So that's 16 extra points in 2 weeks. There are a lot of kids that won't play 16 plays in a 2-week stretch period, but the kicker goes out and does that. Some flowers for Adrian Leon in the kicking game. Genoa Kingston, I can't figure them out. They score points, but I don't know what to make of them.
Yeah, they're kind of a tricky situation. It's just one of those things when you look at where they're at, record-wise, and then you look at their results, it's kind of all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like they've had some low-scoring games, they've had some high-scoring games, they've lost some coin flip games. It's just like, so they sit there right now. They're exactly what they should be based on their record. They are 3-3, but
yep.
they've got Byron this week.
That's what I was just going to say. You are who you say you are. Your record, at least.
The back of the schedule is not favorable to them. They needed to get themselves in a little bit better position because not only do they have Byron this week, they've got Dixon in week 9.
Yeah.
So, they needed to make some hay here, but they lost back-to-back games early in the season by a touchdown. So they were in those games. Either one of them went their way. They fought Seneca really well when they played them. Also lost that game by a touchdown. So. They're dangerously close. One possession here or there, dangerously close to being in a much better situation. But now they've kind of pigeonholed themselves into a real problem area because getting a win in one of those 2 games is a must because essentially they're in a locked conference. So, getting enough points to be a 4-win team isn't going to happen. So,
Right.
So that's one of those things where they got to get to 5, and getting to 5 is going to be a real challenge.
Genoa Kingston hosting Byron, as you mentioned. 15 minutes down the road, the Central Rockets of Rockville Hill will host Huntley. And Huntley, they have a sophomore quarterback who filled in, Malik Carter. He's 6'5", 300 yards passing against a good PR defense. They didn't win the game, and 1 killer turnover, but boy, a sophomore quarterback with that kind of agility, that kind of size. Huntley's scary, and they could be much better than their 3-3 record right now, too. I wonder if the tide could turn for the Red Raiders these next few years, and maybe they can assert themselves in the Fox Valley.
Well, they have a little bit easier path to getting to 5 wins.
Yeah.
And with those information that do you really want to get to pairings night and be a 5 seed and get 28 Huntley on the other side? I don't think I'm really excited about that.
No,
that's not, especially with that added dimension in there that you're talking about there. I mean, boy, I don't think I'd be real excited about that draw. I'd be like, hey, you got a top 5 seed, all right. who we got. That's one of those things. It's just, when you start thinking about where, what's going to happen, but that definitely gives them something to say, hey, let's get to 5 and see what happens and cut her loose. And nobody's expecting us to do any damage from the 28 seed hole. Let's see if we can make it happen.
It reminds me of that Huntley-Batavia game many years ago. It was 70-63. I mean, I can see Fremd on the other side saying, you want to throw some points on the board? Let's go. That's an easy 5-28 game right there in terms of getting points. I can totally see that happening. Couple more nuggets. We talk a lot about the LP Ottawa game, probably more so than we really need to. But 128 meetings, if you read in the paper that in Shaw Locals, they had a great history that ran today, and I love it when local papers do this. Kudos to Shaw Local for doing this. What happened every 10 years? And it goes all the way back to 1915, to the game that year. And so there's a great little piece they put together. It's just awesome. Go take a look at it. It's LP in Ottawa, and again, they've played probably 30 times in the last 3 years. I don't know, something like that, because they go back and forth. And our losing streak winner, our snapper of the week. We just call it the snapper of the week. Can we do that? I like that. Let's hear it for the Fieldcrest squad down in Minot. Fieldcrest, 10-game losing skid, all gone. The former Fighting Schneemans, they were able to get the win and get it in its spectacular fashion. When you lose 10 straight games, does it feel good to get a 48-0 win? Oh yeah, that means everyone gets to play a lot, and that's awesome. So how about that? Fieldcrest. We used to see them as a big-time power. They dropped off a little bit the last 4 or 5 years or so, but nice to see them get off the skid there.
Yep, absolutely. And it's just, like you said, it is a program that has had some really good success and not so far back ago. So sometimes you see how quickly these things can turn, but it also means that there's an opportunity, and we're seeing it this year with some other teams, there's an opportunity to turn it around pretty quick too. So you got to lay the first brick in that foundation, and for Fieldcrest, maybe that's the first brick.
All right, get the windbreaker out, maybe the hoodie out, because the temperature is going to change. Where you headed week 6? Anything or week 7, I should say. Anything off the top of your mind in your area that goes, I should think about that? I don't have a ton, except for the Central Rockets and Huntley. I might go for some work obligations. But Byron down the street kind of piques my interest, too. That might be the closest chance I'll get to see them, so we'll see.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of games that are real close to me that are extremely appealing to me. I might go take a peek at Bradley. They're playing DeKalb this week. I'd like to get a look at Devon Grant. I mean, the DeKalb wide receiver. Get eyeballs on him because, I mean, unfortunately for DeKalb, the way the season's going, I don't think postseason's in their cards, so that would eliminate a chance to maybe see him then. Maybe I might run over there and take in at least a half of that one on Friday night. I still haven't seen Bradley live. I kind of want to. So that's definitely a situation I might look into.
Grant, 135 receptions, the all-time leader at DeKalb High School, which is saying a lot considering the talent they've had through the last good 10, 15 years or so. Mr. Soucie, I will see you on the other side when we talk on Friday night at 9:30 as we watch the scores roll in for week number 7. You have a good week, sir.
Thank you, sir.